Sam is about to be sent to the war in Afghanistan in 2007. He writes a farewell letter to his wife in case he doesn't return alive and gives it to the major, hoping he will never have to send it. Sam is his father's pride and joy, as well as being an exemplary husband and father. He's married to Grace, and they have 2 young daughters, Maggie and Isabel. His younger brother, Tommy, on the other hand, has just been released from prison after serving time for bank robbery. Despite everything, the brothers get along well. Sam picks him up and drops him off in town. That night, Grace prepares a dinner to celebrate Tommy's release. When he arrives, Maggie opens the door and tells him that her mother doesn't like him. During dinner, they celebrate Tommy's return and say goodbye to Sam, who will soon be leaving for Afghanistan. Tommy comments that Sam loves going to war, but he replies that he's only doing his duty. His niece, Isabel, says that he only shoots the bad guys, and Tommy asks who the bad guys are. The father, Hank, gets upset and praises Sam as a hero, comparing him to his brother. The argument ends with Hank leaving the house. Before saying goodbye, Tommy asks Sam to be careful. That night, Sam takes off his wedding ring, and Grace hangs it around his neck, telling him she loves him. 5 days later, Sam crosses the Afghan desert and records everything with his phone. Shortly after, the helicopter transporting him and his squad is shot down and crashes. Grace is taking a shower when the doorbell rings. Isabel opens the door and sees 2 soldiers who have come with the terrible news of her father's death. Devastated, Grace watches Sam's videos again and again and dials his number over and over. That night, Tommy arrives drunk to return the truck his brother had lent him. Through tears, Grace tells him what has happened. Tommy, the last to find out, explodes with rage and shouts that they never should have let Sam go to Afghanistan before storming off angrily. Back at his parents' house, he sits on the porch while his stepmother tries to comfort him, telling him that his brother is now with his mother. Inside, his father drinks silently, devastated. The next day, Grace gets the girls ready for the funeral, but they refuse to wear black. At the ceremony, Hank wears his military uniform, and Grace receives Sam's farewell letter. After the burial, Hank drinks again, and Tommy tries to take his keys away to prevent him from driving drunk. Hank reproaches Tommy again and compares him to Sam. He asks him who will speak well of him when he dies, as the Marines spoke of Sam, and tells him he's never had any guts. Tommy responds by reminding him how he yelled at his mother, how he drove drunk, and how he filled Sam's head with military ideas so he would join the Marines. Finally, Hank walks away. Grace is afraid to open Sam's letter and keeps it. I want to pause here to introduce what, for me, is the central theme of the film. You may not see it so clearly yet, but I will explain it so you can keep it in mind and perhaps notice it as the story progresses. The theme I'm talking about is guilt. If you pay attention to the details, you'll notice that this feeling is present in all the important characters in the film. And the story will show us, in different ways, how each one of them deals with it. But before analyzing how guilt operates in each one, it's worth pausing for a moment to understand what this feeling is and why it's so important to the human experience. Guilt is a discomfort that arises when we recognize that we've done something we consider wrong, or when we did not do something that we should have done. And it usually involves the perception of having hurt somebody in some way. We can understand it as an internal punishment for having acted against our values or principles. Thus, we can understand that guilt, like any emotion, serves a purpose. In this case, a fundamental social function. It helps us preserve human bonds. As uncomfortable as it may be to feel, it can motivate us to apologize, repair the damage, and act more responsibly. In that sense, it's closely linked to empathy. In fact, the total absence of guilt or remorse is one of the traits that experts associate with psychopathy. But just as guilt can be useful, it can also become destructive when it's experienced as something unforgivable. When the damage done is perceived as irreparable, the person may end up punishing themselves destructively, as if seeking some kind of penance. Sometimes the guilt is so great that we choose to silence it, to keep it secret. We hide the mistakes of others, but the weight of that emotion ends up devouring us from within. Like Shakespeare's Macbeth or Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov, characters consumed by what they did and tormented by their own consciences. Now that I've explained the above, I'm going to analyze how the main characters in the film carry their guilt and how each one of them deals with it differently. I'll start with the first one in whom this is already a little more evident, which is Hank. Hank was in the Vietnam War, a war that ended up being a disaster for the United States, a war with no clear purpose. And Hank, like many veterans, returned traumatized and probably did things he regretted, but he kept both the guilt and pain to himself. This will become evident when we see him later, mocking the fact that now everyone goes to therapy for anything. Ironic, isn't it? The guy who believes that talking about his pain makes him weak and mocks those who dare to do so becomes an alcoholic and a distant father, precisely because he didn't do it. As I've said in other videos, and I'll never tire of repeating it, I think those who can face their pain head on are much stronger and braver than those who run away from it. But anyway, the point is that by keeping his guilt and trauma to himself, Hank took refuge in alcohol and isolated himself from his own family, as Tommy reproached him for doing. And now, after Sam's death, he probably felt guilty too, perhaps guilty for having encouraged him to join the military, for having pushed him into a life that led him to war. But once again, we see him dealing with these feelings in the same way he always has, with alcohol, by evading them. Just a quick pause to say that if you're enjoying this video and haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. It would mean a lot and really helps me keep making more videos and content like this. Alright, let's get back to the story. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the Taliban escort 2 soldiers, Sam and Private Joe, who have survived. They capture them and lock them in an underground prison. Sam asks Joe not to say anything to their captors. That night, Tommy, drunk, calls Grace at 3 in the morning to ask her for money. He's $47 short of paying a bartender who's threatening to report him for violating his probation. Grace goes, pays the debt, and takes him home. The next morning, Tommy wakes up to the sound of the girls making pancakes to cheer up their mother. He asks them to be quiet, but Maggie refuses. At that moment, Hank arrives and apologizes for his previous behavior. Tommy admits that Sam was always smarter, but Hank tells him that the difference was that Tommy always gave up. In tears, Tommy says he would give up anything to get his brother back, and Hank comments that he doesn't understand how Grace can live with such a messy kitchen. Meanwhile, Sam looks through a crack in the shelter and sees a helicopter flying over the Taliban camp. Convinced they're looking for him, he tries to free the boards with a stone, but they threaten him with a gun and place a heavy rock on top of him. Tommy remembers his father's criticism of Grace's kitchen and, together with his friends, decides to renovate it without telling her. 2 months of captivity have passed. Sam tries to stay strong, but Soldier Joe breaks down and blames the captain for saving him, saying he would rather be dead. Sam demands that he not reveal his identity or rank. The Taliban argue and then move the prisoners to another location. In front of them, they execute an Afghan man who had revealed their location by calling his pregnant wife. The Taliban leader declares that this is their country and that Americans should not be there. He orders them to take that message back to the United States, or he will force them to do so. While Grace mourns the loss of her husband, the renovation continues. The men and girls work together, reminiscing about what a great athlete Sam was. Maggie accidentally spills paint on one of the helpers. Grace looks for Sam's clothes for him, but breaks down while doing so and ends up taking all his clothes out of the closet. In Afghanistan, Sam is tied to a pole under the sun. They douse him with water and ask if he will help his friend. In front of him, Joe is tortured with a hot iron. Unable to bear the pain, Joe confesses on camera that the Americans should not be there, sends love to his wife and son, and reveals that Sam has 2 daughters. Grace arrives home and is surprised to see the kitchen remodeled just in time for her birthday. Everyone congratulates her, and she thanks Jimmy for the gesture. With the arrival of winter, during a walk, Isabel complains to Tommy that everyone prefers Maggie because she's prettier. He tells her how Sam once saved him from drowning in that same river, and tells her that if she accepts herself, everyone will love her too. Then they go to the ice rink, where Grace is surprised to see how well Tommy gets along with the girls. One day, Tommy visits the bank employee he had threatened during the robbery and apologizes to her. They talk for an hour. The woman confesses that she lived in fear for 3 years, and he assures her that he will not hurt her. She thanks him tearfully, saying that she can finally breathe. That night, Tommy tells Grace, and she feels proud of him. Then they reminisce about their high school years. Tommy tells her that she was a pain in the neck, and Grace admits that she didn't like him because he was always drunk and getting into fights. They look into each other's eyes and kiss passionately. Grace stops, says she needs air, and Tommy, crying, leaves. Many people think this movie is about a love triangle, but it's not. The only thing we see between Tommy and Grace is that kiss, and nothing else. If you pay attention, you'll realize that there hasn't been, and won't be, a real focus on their relationship, even when months pass in the story. The main theme isn't that. I insist, the main theme is guilt. But anyway, now we can start talking about guilt in Tommy, and then Grace. We can detect 2 moments of guilt in him. But first, it's worth breaking down his story a bit, because that will help us understand better. Let's start from the beginning, trying to put all the pieces together. Although some are a little vague and lack context, I'm going to try to construct something that makes a little more sense. We know that when Hank returned from the Vietnam War, he came back a violent, hardened, and distant man. If we consider that the film takes place in 2007 and the Vietnam War ended in 1975, there's a difference of about 32 years. That means that the traumatic return happened when the brothers were still children. Since then, Tommy probably began to harbor resentment toward his father and a rejection of everything the war represented, feelings that were reinforced when he saw how Hank projected all his military ideals onto Sam. Perhaps because he was the oldest, Sam, for his part, adopted those values, partly because of the approval and recognition he received from his father, and thus ended up becoming his pride and joy, while Tommy was left out. At some point, although the film does not specify when, the boy's mother died. She was probably the one who made Tommy feel loved. So, at least for a while, the brothers were left alone with their father. And since Sam was the model son, the one who perfectly fit Hank's values, Tommy likely grew up feeling belittled, unloved, disappointed, and harboring a deep resentment toward Hank. His transgression of the rules, his rebellion against authority, or even his rejection of the idea of war can be understood as a symbolic way of challenging it. If Sam became the perfect soldier, the exemplary son, according to his father's values, Tommy chose to be the opposite, the one who broke the rules and defied expectations. Deep down, the two were, in reality, opposite reflections of the same father. The turning point for Tommy came with Sam's supposed death, but also, I believe, with something his father said to him. After Grace rescued him from his drunkenness, Tommy spoke to Hank and admitted that Sam had always been smarter. That sentence subtly revealed how Tommy perceived himself, as someone who wasn't good enough. And it was also how he imagined his father saw him. And after so many comparisons, it's not hard to understand why. I think that, perhaps unconsciously, Tommy adopted that role as part of his identity. He convinced himself that he was the failure, the problem, and he lived his life confirming that role over and over again, sabotaging himself at every opportunity. But then Hank replied, "The difference is that you always gave up." That response struck me as key, because in other words, he was telling him that he wasn't inferior, he just stopped trying. And with that, Hank dismantled the narrative Tommy had built about himself. That's when Tommy felt guilt for the first time. He began to feel guilty for everything he had done, for who he had been, for his rebelliousness, for his drunkenness, for robbing the bank, and for threatening an innocent woman. Perhaps also guilt for being alive while his brother was not. But that guilt moved him to make amends, to change. The first thing he did after that conversation was something both literal and symbolic. He repaired Grace's kitchen. Symbolic because, at the same time, he was repairing something within himself. Shortly after, he sought out the bank employee he had threatened to apologize. And there, he found a purpose he had never had before. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he could be useful, and that he could do something right. So, to recap, in this first moment, guilt led Tommy to apologize, to make amends, and to act more responsibly. But then, another moment of guilt arrived, both for Tommy and Grace. An emotional connection began to emerge between them, which materialized in the passionate kiss we just saw. Immediately, both were overwhelmed by guilt. Grace stopped and went outside for some air, while Tommy cried and walked away. But later on, we'll see just how they're dealing with this guilt they're both carrying. In Afghanistan, Sam and Joe continue to be tortured. One day, the Taliban gives Sam an iron bar and order him to kill his partner, whom they consider a burden. Sam refuses at first, but when threatened and pressured, he ends up beating Joe to death. This execution is recorded on video. Tommy returns to Grace's house on the pretext of installing some moldings. She is somewhat uncomfortable after what happened the night before. He comments that he would like to see the girls from time to time, and Grace tells him she would love for him to do so. Later, Hank arrives, surprised to see his son working so hard. In Afghanistan, the Taliban camp is attacked by US forces. A leader tries to kill Sam, but fails and is shot dead. The camera with the recording is destroyed. Finally, Sam is free. While Tommy plays with the girls, the phone rings. Grace receives the news that her husband has survived. In shock, she travels with the family to welcome him at the airport. Tommy feels happy and sad at the same time. The girls show their father the new kitchen that Tommy and his friends remodeled. Sam lies down and hugs his wife and daughters tightly. But when Grace accompanies him to the bathroom and kisses his scars, he acts distant and hints that she should leave. Hank notices Sam's strange behavior and remembers how he isolated himself from his family after returning from Vietnam. At the ice rink, Sam watches Grace and the girls laughing with Tommy. He thanks his brother for taking care of them, but suddenly asks him if he slept with Grace. Tommy laughs and then denies it, but Sam is convinced otherwise and asks him not to lie to him. Later, Joe's widow visits the family. Her young son, Joe Jr., peeks out shyly. She confesses that in her dreams, she hates Sam for having survived while her husband did not, but she's come to apologize. She is tired of living with that resentment and wants to forgive. The widow asks Sam if he saw how Joe died. Sam lies and says no. One night, he breaks down. With a gun in his hand, he arranges glasses and walks around the house as if looking for an enemy when he hears barking. The next day, he visits the military base and asks to return to service. When the major asks him about his family, Sam replies that he can't stay, that no one understands him. The major reminds him that both he and his family need time to heal. During dinner, the girls joke around and Sam loses control. Grace tries to calm him down, but he gets up and leaves. Isabel asks when Uncle Tommy will be back. Grace confronts her husband. She wants him to talk to her about Afghanistan, but Sam only asks what happened between her and Tommy. She admits that they kissed, believing he was dead, but nothing else. Sam doesn't believe her, convinced that they slept together. He leaves in a rage. Here, we can already see how Tommy and Grace have dealt with their guilt, the kiss, and their feelings. That guilt led them to repress any subsequent feelings. As we have seen, guilt has kept them in their place. Neither of them crossed that line again. And if you think about it, they never talked about what happened. They just buried it. When Sam returned and asked Tommy about it, even hinting that they seemed in love, Tommy couldn't say anything. He laughed, avoided the subject, unable to face it because the guilt was too great. Grace, for her part, confessed that it was just a kiss, but didn't admit to anything else. That night, Sam visits the grave of Private Joe, who was only 21 years old. Sam returns the next morning and finds the girls playing outside. Isabel stands still, frightened. Sam hugs them and tells them he was just confused. Then he confesses to Grace that he spent the night thinking about his family and realizing how lucky he is to have survived, and they hug. On Maggie's birthday, everyone goes to Hank's house. They wait for Tommy, who arrives with Tina, a girl he met an hour earlier. During the conversation, Tina comments that everyone needs someone to listen to them. Hank responds that people now seek therapy for anything, but Tina insists that even though Marines are trained, they're still human, and no one can prepare to see someone die. Sam tenses up. The girls start fighting over a doll, and Sam scolds Isabel. She complains that Maggie always gets the best, and that she didn't get what she wanted for her birthday. Then she makes a noise with a balloon to get attention. Sam loses control and pops it. Isabel screams that she wishes he had stayed dead, and that he's angry because Mom prefers to sleep with Uncle Tommy. They're always being intimate, she says. A deep silence fills the room. Sam is paralyzed. They return home in silence. Before going to sleep, Isabel apologizes to her mother, assuring her that it wasn't true. She just doesn't like her dad and prefers Uncle Tommy. Maggie admits that she does too. There is another very interesting subtext in the film that's worth discussing. Notice how, at first, we were presented with a warm, stable family with loving, present parents and 2 happy daughters. But when Sam returned from the war, all of that fell apart. And I think what the film is trying to tell us, albeit indirectly, is that the battlefield doesn't end when the war ends. War is brought home. Violence, trauma, and pain seep into the homes and infect everything. Both Sam and Hank, like many other men, returned from conflicts that sent thousands of young people to kill and die for vague, poorly justified causes, only to return with broken souls and shattered homes. This study shows that combat deployment significantly increases the likelihood of domestic violence and child abuse. Of course, many of these men return with deep trauma, post-traumatic stress, guilt, and an inability to feel at peace. And whatever they can't process, they end up projecting onto other people. Hank did it to his wife and children. Sam did it to Grace and his girls. In both cases, war infiltrated the home and destroyed something beautiful. Of course, not to mention how many don't even come back. We saw how Joe's family was left completely helpless, and we see once again that war destroys families. Sam is in the living room and asks Grace if the girls have prayed yet. Then, in a fit of rage, he starts smashing the new kitchen with an iron bar. He yells that she doesn't understand everything he did and suffered to come back, and accuses her of sleeping with Tommy in his own house. He shouts that he loves her and that he doesn't know what he's capable of doing with his own hands. Desperate, he bangs his head and continues to break everything. At that moment, Tommy enters and tries to calm him down, but Sam pulls out a gun and points it at him. Sirens can be heard outside. Sam comes out with a gun in his hand. The police order him to drop it, but he shouts that he's no hero, that they don't know what he did. He points the gun at his temple. Tommy approaches, and Sam, on the verge of collapse, confesses, "I'm drowning." Then he throws down the gun and is arrested. Now it's time to talk about Sam. Sam carries immense guilt for the traumatic event of killing Joe. He perceives this act as unforgivable and irreparable. The whole ideal of the honorable man, the soldier who serves his country and fights the bad guys, which he had built up around himself, completely collapsed. Added to the guilt is shame. The shame of having done something that contradicts everything he believed in. Both emotions are so overwhelming that Sam doesn't dare talk about what happened, not even with those closest to him, not with his father, who also went to Vietnam and might have understood, nor with his wife, who loves him the most. He prefers to keep it quiet, to hide it, even though it destroys him inside. But we've seen how this conflict manifests itself in his behavior, in his coldness, his insomnia, his irritability, his aggressiveness. All this inner torment seeks an escape route. Sometimes it surfaces in phrases like, "You don't know what these hands are capable of," which are, in reality, disguised confessions. Even taking a slightly more risky interpretation, we could say that his unshakable certainty that Tommy and Grace slept together is linked, perhaps in part, to his own unconscious desire for punishment, as if he needed to believe that it happened to suffer for it. That night, Grace sleeps with her daughters to calm them down. She finally opens Sam's letter, in which he writes, "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't come back. Nothing is certain in this life, except that I love my girls and you." She bursts into tears. Sam calls Tommy from the Veterans Clinic to reconcile with him. Tommy looks after his nieces while Grace visits her husband. She asks him why he punishes himself so much and reminds him that she's loved him since she was 16, warning him that if he doesn't tell her what happened, she won't see him again. Then Sam, with tears in his eyes, confesses, "I killed Joe Willis." Grace hugs him, and he wonders if he will ever be able to live a normal life again. The film leaves us with many unanswered questions. What will happen to Grace, Sam, and Tommy? We don't know, and perhaps we don't need to know, because in the end, as I've been saying, the real protagonist is none of them. It's guilt. The story ended just where the hardest part began, the process of learning to live with what one has done, with what one did not do, with what one feels and cannot escape. I think that what the film leaves us with, beyond all the drama, is a lesson about the importance of recognizing and talking about what hurts us. In the end, Sam was finally able to say out loud what he had kept inside and was consuming him. And although talking about it does not erase the pain or solve everything, it's an important first step in beginning to process it. Being able to put into words what we carry inside allows us to look at it head on, observe it, understand it, and give it new meaning. And sometimes, when we manage to do so, we also find the possibility of forgiving ourselves for what we did, for what we didn't do, or for what we didn't know how to do. Guilt only stops destroying us when we stop running away from it and begin to transform it, and part of that transformation involves trying to make amends. Sometimes we can do this directly by apologizing or correcting damage, but other times it's not possible. And then perhaps the best way to make amends is to become better people. Perhaps in this way we can integrate what has happened to us into our personal history without denying it or carrying it as an eternal condemnation. And perhaps there, in that act of accepting and moving forward, lies the true redemption that the film suggests, even if it does not say so. Thanks for staying until the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe and share it with a friend who you think might enjoy it. And you and I'll see you in the next one.